This video is an excerpt from my course, Illustrator Artistry, which teaches about adding texture and hand-drawn touches to your artwork in Illustrator. When you introduce textures or complex tracing to your documents, a side effect is that Illustrator's performance can slow down, making it difficult to work with repeating art and patterns. This video explains why that happens and what you can do about it. In the next demonstration, I'll show you how you can use Adobe Capture and color shapes to make a design like this. So far, we've been using black and white shapes, but you can also make color shapes in Capture. They do add a lot of complexity and they can slow down Illustrator's performance. So in this video, I'll help you understand the complexity and how we can simplify our art. So what makes for a good vector texture? Well, it's always something that can be simplified. So as we looked at in the bitmap section, any image with tiny little ink flecks, you really have to think about Illustrator having to trace and outline every single one of those. That level of detail, while good for image texture, isn't so great for vector texture. But when you start to see what you can do with Capture, you'll find it has effects and adjustments that can remove a lot of that texture and create something that can be simplified. And you see the difference in the image at the bottom and the capture shape above it. So here's an example. I'm going to copy this dahlia. This is a photograph that I got from Adobe stock. And now if I go into image trace, and we will talk more about image trace in this section, and we certainly talk a lot about it in the ArtBrush Workflows course, I'm going to go ahead and just run a quick tracing using the 16 color tracing preset. So this is going to be simpler than if I had traced this as a high fidelity photo. And we can see that the tracing breaks down this flower into many little shapes like this. One of my favorite tools for evaluating how complex things are in Illustrator is the Document Info panel. And if you don't have it open, just go up to the Window menu and down to Document Info. Once you've got that open, you can select something, and I'll just select the flower. And what I have at the moment is a tracing. Let me go ahead and expand this because I forgot that crucial step to expand the tracing. Then over in the Document Info panel, go to the Options menu and select Objects so that you can look at the data for selected objects. And what we're seeing here is 17,198 anchor points in that flower. So that's a lot. The number of anchor points is a good way to gauge the complexity in our artwork. So if I look at this, just selecting with the white arrow, we now see every one of those anchor points. And now, as I'm moving the flower around this document, Illustrator's not slowing down, so it's not a problem at the moment. But I always like to bring this up, especially for pattern designers, because if you're going to use this flower multiple times in your design, you're just going to be multiplying the number of anchor points for every copy of that flower, and you'll see that will slow things down. Now, why is that? Well, I like to look at all of these anchor points here as instructions to Illustrator. And so each one of these, it has a location, an X and Y coordinate. Each one of them has a curve handle at a specific angle. There's a path in between each anchor point. And so if we think about these as instructions to the computer, what happens when we need to double the size of this flower and maybe move it across the document to another artboard? Well, each one of these anchor points is going to have to be moved to a new X and Y coordinate. Each one of these distances between the path is going to have to be doubled. And so every single one of those little instructions and operations here takes longer to run through when you have more anchor points and more paths in the flower. So then we need to ask, well, can Illustrator draw this with fewer anchor points? I mean, as I look at this right here, this shape is irregular to some degree, but there are a lot of redundant points here. And this is just a part of what happens when you image trace things. Illustrator is trying to give you something accurate, and it's not thinking about the most efficient way to do that or how you might use this in the future. And so that's what we have to take control of. And so let's look at a tool that we can use for simplifying things. We'll go up to the Object menu, then choose Path and Simplify. And it's going to take a second to open. This is one of those moments of, the many instructions that slow Illustrator down. And then there's a slider here, but I always like to come to More Options and open the full panel up. And we can see by running a 75% simplify on this, we immediately get 17,000 anchor points down to 6,600 anchor points. So that's huge. And it's going to look virtually the same. You can tell this here by using the checkbox. If I uncheck preview, and then check it again. We're not going to see a tremendous amount of difference. And you can see it took a second for that checkbox to work because, again, it's running all of those instructions on every single one of those anchors. All right, so I'm going to click OK. And so now we've reduced the number of anchor points and made the art a lot more simple without really changing it much. What's interesting to me is the fact that Illustrator can do all of these calculations so quickly. That's pretty amazing. When you're moving your objects around or putting drop shadows on them, it just works really fast. But if we give it 50,000 anchor points, or if we give it 100,000 anchor points, then we might just be asking too much of Illustrator. Now that we understand a little more about why we always want to be thinking ahead and not creating needless complexity in our vector texture, let's move on to looking at how the Capture app can help with this. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this excerpt from my Illustrator Artistry course. It's available inside my Illustrator Learning community that contains courses and live Zoom calls. Find out more at my website at lauracoylecreative.com.